to give you guys some actionable tips about how to reverse diabetes. So that's really the purpose of this presentation. We're not going to dive too deep into what exactly diabetes is or what carbohydrates are. That's going to be the next two presentations. So we're kind of starting with those steps that you can take. These are new statistics from the CDC 2020. 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes and 3 in 10 has pre-diabetes. So that leaves us about 50% of American adults have diabetes. So this is a major prevalent chronic disease that's going on in our nation today, and a lot of people are facing it. All right. So 9 in 10 adults have diabetes and don't know it. Who have pre-diabetes don't know it. So I urge you to go to this website right here below, doihaveprediabetes.org, and you can take a little quiz and they'll tell you if maybe you're at risk. Obviously the best person to talk about this is your doctor, but you know, if it's something that you're nervous about asking and unsure, then this is the best place to go. And just real quick, I wanted to dive into what kind of each one is. So diabetes is defined by a A1C level of greater than 6.5, and prediabetes is from 5.7 to 6.5. So typically when I talk to someone that I'm working with in health coaching, this is the number we're talking about all the time. I'm like, what's your A1C at? What do you want it to be at? That type of thing. So, and this gives us a picture of what the blood sugar control has been for the past few months rather than just today. So that's what the fasting.
I'm here. This is Bill Bakeless.
Oh, hi, Bill.
Hello.
How's it going? You just missed like 2 slides, so you're fine.
Okay.
Alrighty. So, anyways, A1C 6.5 for diabetics, 5.7 to 6.5 for prediabetes. So, prediabetes does not guarantee that you are going to develop diabetes at all by any means, and in fact, both of these are completely reversible, okay? So that's an important point I want to get across here. These are just the numbers that you might discuss with your doctor or look at with a dietitian or me. And this is what a normal blood sugar in a non-diabetic person might look like. So this is, we all have 5 liters of blood in our body. This is an average person. 1 teaspoon of sugar is going to raise your blood sugar to 100, and that's within the normal range. 140 milligrams per deciliter is the point at which cellular damage occurs from diabetes, which really is not high at all. And you know, if you think about something that's a pretty healthy, so to speak, food that people think of, what about a cup of brown rice? That's 45 grams of carbohydrates. So that's 9 teaspoons of sugar. So going back to that last slide, 9 teaspoons of sugar is going to put your blood sugar pretty high in comparison to that 1 teaspoon of sugar. And the difficulty here is that I think there's a lot of like shame that comes along with having diabetes, not that it should be that way in any way. I think a lot of times doctors just say, you got to lose weight, you got to stop eating the candy, that type of thing. And that's not always the case. You know, the thing is that another good word for diabetes type 2 is carbohydrate intolerance. So it's almost like an allergy in a sense. So you have people that have a high carbohydrate tolerance, this guy on the left who is your friend that everyone gets so annoyed by. They can eat all the pasta in the world and they never gain a pound. And what's basically going on here is that their body's insulin receptors are turning the key and letting all of that blood sugar into their cells quickly. The person that has a low carbohydrate tolerance, unfortunately, their body doesn't function quite as well. The insulin's trying to open the doors, but the blood sugar just can't get into those cells. And what ends up happening is that the body ends up storing a mass of fat, because if it can't go into the muscle cells, it gets stored in fat cells. And that's why they tend to gain a little bit more weight. And what also happens is that their body tries to produce more insulin since the normal amount of insulin that's being released is not doing the job. And insulin is a fat storage hormone. So insulin is getting stored as fat, and this triggers hunger and cravings. So it puts you in this never-ending cycle of eat, a carbohydrate, high blood sugar, high insulin, fat storage, insulin resistance, tiredness, cravings, lethargy, So it's really quite an unfair cycle, I have to say. So here's a really good question for you guys, and I think I have you muted so you don't have to answer out loud, but if you're on diabetes medication, the question is, do you think it will help you get better? Can it help you get better? And I challenge you with that question because realistically, no, it can't. And this is the difference between management and treatment. The current standard of care in our healthcare system today is management. So rather than treating the root cause, we're simply managing the symptoms. And the problem with that is you can treat your diabetes with insulin. That's great. I want you to manage your diabetes, but it's never going to reverse it. It's never going to improve it. It's simply going to manage it and keep it where it's at. And that's not what we want, I hope. So we're going to talk about how to deal with the root cause of diabetes, which is insulin resistance. So we're going to try and address that and talk about what we can do there. And these on the right side here are direct quotes from the American Diabetes Association and Kaiser Permanente. They say there's a 0.1% diabetes remission rate, and type 2 doesn't really get better. So these are the odds we're up against. That's okay. I'm willing to accept that because we're gonna beat this whole thing. That's my belief. And to talk just a little bit more about insulin, this was an ACCORD trial that was done with over 8,000. And this is something that you should look at when you're looking at research studies, is how many people were involved in the study. 8,000 people is a pretty significant number that you can say these are pretty concise results. So what they did was treat these individuals who were diabetic with high levels of insulin. So they wanted to see if this would produce better health outcomes. And what actually happened is that they ended up gaining a ton of weight because, like we just talked about, insulin is a fat storage hormone. So they gained a ton of weight. And what actually ended up happening is they had to stop this study because the health outcomes were so poor. So insulin is not the answer that we are looking for here at all. It's simply a tool to manage it while we work on the other factors that can improve your insulin resistance. And I want to, reiterate this. Diabetes is reversible. Prediabetes is reversible. And your genetics do not diagnose you. They do not. So just because your grandma had diabetes, your grandpa had diabetes, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, whoever it was, I don't care, that does not define your future. It's up to you to make the decisions in your life that lead to that diagnosis. And and the other part I wanted to say here is that there is no one solution that will work for everyone. What works for one person might not work for someone else, and that's okay. And that's what, working with your doctor, your dietitian, your health coach, that's what that's about, is kind of sifting through what works or does not for you. So this is what we're going to talk about here. So we have, if you were to do nothing, this is the progression of type 2 diabetes. So we all have this carbohydrate tolerance that we kind of discussed before, kind of like an alcohol tolerance, right? The more alcohol you drink, the more your body needs to get drunk. Well, it's kind of like that with insulin. So at first, your body only needs so much insulin to remove the sugar from the blood, and then it needs more and more and more and more. So what do we have to do to reverse that? Well, we have to eat below our tolerance. So to kind of reverse that process, we have to make our body sensitive again. And that doesn't mean forever. It just means to kind of reinstate that tolerance. So there are 3 clinically proven ways to reverse diabetes: bariatric surgery, calorie restriction or weight loss, and carbohydrate restriction. So bariatric surgery, very rare. The only way you're gonna have that occur with you is, you know, through very strict regulations. So probably just gonna knock that out right there. But calorie restriction or weight loss. This one, don't want, and I'll tell you why. Calorie restriction and weight loss aren't always a long-term, effective, sustainable approach. So the main approach we're going to talk about today is carbohydrate restriction, which is quite a bit more sustainable. So these are kind of the things we're going to focus on, just to kind of lay them out. A low carbohydrate eating pattern for blood sugar control, weight loss, hydration, and cortisol reduction. All right. So before we get into this, I want to ask you, do you have the desire to change? So if you have a piece of paper with you, this would be a good thing to write down on a piece of paper, make a list of the reasons why this is important to you, or maybe to your significant other or someone else that you might be thinking of as you're watching this. Make a list of the reasons why this is important. Is it because you want to grow old and see your kids grow up and have their own kids and see your grandbabies and chase them in the yard and, you know, live to the end of your life in a healthy way, not in a hospital or anything like that? There's so many reasons why this might be important to you, and that's totally individual to you. So that's really defining your why you care. And I think this was kind of interesting. I found that prior to the discovery of insulin, very low carbohydrate diets were considered the standard treatment for people with diabetes. So back in the 1920s, they didn't know what was causing diabetes. They thought it was like a kind of like an autoimmune type of allergic reaction to sugar. They didn't know what was going on, but they did know that eating a low carbohydrate diet worked. And unfortunately, in modern America, we kind of threw that out the door and just started prescribing medications instead of treating that root cause. So we're going to talk about low carbohydrate eating patterns, which is the most effective approach in my opinion. And it's important for me to say as I get into this, if you are diabetic, this is something you want to talk to your doctor before you put in place in your personal life. Insulin is the amount of units that you take is based on the amount of carbohydrates you're eating. So if you reduce your carbohydrates, you could end up bottoming out on your blood sugar. So you have to be aware of that. So it does add a little bit layer of difficulty there. So here's a question. Are all calories equal? Do you guys know the answer to this? I'll let you know in another slide here. We'll get to that in a second, but a lot of the reason why we are where we are today is that the common dietary advice, particularly starting in the 1970s, was low fat, low fat, low fat, low fat, low fat everything. They said, get rid of the fat. We don't want that. That's how you're going to be fit and healthy and yada, yada, yada. Well, not the case, because here's what happened. They removed the fat and chocked it full of sugar. So think about your Yoplait yogurt. Got as much candy as a can of soda, or I'm sorry, as much sugar as a can of soda in there. You know, same with like these Simplast, the tortillas. So if something says low fat, no fat, fat free, that's probably a pretty good idea of something that you want to leave at the store. Fat is a good thing in your diet, and I'll tell you why in our next slide. So these are the insulin response and blood sugar response of the 3 macronutrients. So I'll talk a little bit more about the basics of these macronutrients in our carbohydrates 101 presentation in the next couple of weeks. But our 3 macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Okay, and these are how your blood sugar is affected. So when you eat carbohydrates, we get a spike. Okay. And when we eat protein, we get a low curve, and fat, almost no blood sugar or insulin response. So as you can imagine, someone who is highly sensitive to carbohydrates and sugar in their blood, someone who is pre-diabetic or diabetic, they're probably going to want to aim for the latter 2 rather than the carbohydrates to incorporate into their diet. So that answers my questions. Are all calories equal? No. I'm going to admit someone in. No, obviously not, because they affect our blood sugar and our bodies completely differently. And they do all have their own purposes in life. And I want to make it clear to you that this presentation is geared towards people who are diabetic, pre-diabetic, or at risk for diabetes, because in a normal average person, they don't need to be this worried about carbohydrates, and in fact, they're very important. But when you're highly sensitive, almost in a sense intolerant to carbohydrates, it's another story. So, and going off of that, there is something called the glycemic index, and this basically explains how your body reacts to certain foods, how much your blood sugar is raised. So these are all carbohydrate foods, and some raise the blood sugar much more than others. And this isn't something you need to focus on when you're like looking to plan a meal or anything like that. It gets a little too complicated, but it's just something to be aware of. Some things raise your blood, some carbohydrates raise your blood sugar much, much more and significantly than other foods. So as you can see, you know, like watermelon has a higher glycemic index than bananas. And the reason for that is fiber. So fiber, think about like broccoli or apples, like that thick, crunchy material, like the skin of the apple, even like the skin of a potato, that's fiber, and it prevents your body from absorbing something quickly. Soda pop, straight sugar, goes like right into your bloodstream, spikes that blood sugar, and puts you in that cycle of fat storage, cravings, crash. So that's what we don't want. So this is just something to be aware of. And here's a little comparison of different GI indexes of food. So, you know, you've got broccoli, which is a 10, and you've got donuts, which is a 76. And actually, pizza ain't that bad, 33. And the reason for that is because it's got cheese, which is a fat on it, which slows the absorption. So fats are going to slow absorption, proteins are going to slow absorption. So if you can include a fat or a protein with your carbohydrates, that's going to help. So counting carbs, this is probably the most effective way to prevent or reverse diabetes, but it's also takes a little bit more thought and planning. And I'll talk more about how to count carbs in our next presentation, but I did want to touch on it here because it's very important. So based on a ton of different research studies, you know, the consensus is that if you're trying to prevent or reverse diabetes, 20 to 90 grams of carbohydrates a day is going to be the most effective at improving your blood sugar. And how do you know how much carbohydrates are in a food? By looking at the food label, of course. So, you know, the food label I have here on the screen, you see it, you should see it on the box or bag of anything that you buy. And if you can't, if it's something that doesn't have a label like a banana, you can look it up on the internet, super easy. So always look at this and make sure you're looking at the serving size. So for this item in particular, 1 1/2 cups is 46 grams of carbohydrate, okay? So if you are only eating 90 grams of carbohydrates a day, this is just about half of your serving size there. So always, always, always make sure you're reading your labels, and that's how you're gonna know how much sugar is in there too. So for example, in this item, it's got 2 grams of added sugar. And this is where things get a little bit complicated because there's natural sugars. So like, for example, dairy foods, you'll see quite a lot of carbohydrates and sugar in dairy products because they are natural, but they don't typically have added sugar unless it's like a sweetened yogurt or something like that. So, and once again, that number that you're trying to avoid is 140 milligrams per deciliter. So one thing that I didn't touch on yet with the label is a very beautiful thing called calculating the net carb. And I try to reiterate this to everyone I work with because it makes your life a lot easier. So basically what this means is that when you're trying to calculate the net carbs on a food label, you subtract the number of carbohydrate grams from the number of fiber grams. So it would be 46 minus 7, that would be 39 net grams of carbohydrate. And the reason that you can do that is because your body does not absorb the fiber. It does not absorb it, it just passes right through you. It's so good for you, and you should be trying to reach at least 25 to 30 grams of fiber every day. Best place to get those fruits and vegetables, whole grains, okay? Is that confusing? And another thing that I think a lot of people forget about when they're calculating their carbs or their fiber or whatever, looking at their labels, counting calories, is beverages. So do remember that those do have calories and carbohydrates. So those count towards what's raising your blood sugar, and those are going to raise your blood sugar the most quickly and cause those spikes in that little curve that we looked at before. So this is the next method, and this I would recommend, you know, the counting carbs, I would absolutely recommend anyone who is diabetic or pre-diabetic do that method. But if that's a little too difficult for you, balanced plate method is the way to go. And what this is basically just saying that your plate should have half vegetables, 1/4 protein, and 1/4 non-starchy veggies on your plate. So this is what your plate should look like, and you can build it whatever which way you want. And I made sure to add 2 tablespoons of fat there at the top. Fat is really important, like we said, in normalizing that blood sugar, and it's something that doesn't raise your blood sugar. So if you're watching your blood sugar, this is definitely an important thing to include. So some healthy fats like avocados, olive oil, that would be like your salad dressings, nuts and seeds, nut butters like peanut butter, cheese, pesto is one that I love. So that's the balanced plate method. So I don't know if you guys can think of any examples of a meal you might eat that follows this pattern. You know, I mean, it could be as simple as literally building your plate this way, having half of a sweet potato, a thing of chicken, and a side of broccoli, or it could be an egg salad with some cauliflower rice and cheese, or it could be this one's like a chicken salad with some tomatoes and avocado. I just wanted to give you guys some examples of what this could look like. This one's got sweet potato, broccoli, chicken, and some barbecue sauce. Another salad with some pasta on it. So the beauty of the balanced plate method and the beauty of carb counting is that it doesn't necessarily say you can't have anything. You can fit any of those foods into your day, but I will say eating higher fiber, low glycemic index foods is going to make it a lot easier for you. So these are some foods that naturally reduce your blood sugar, so they're great things to include in your diet. So nuts, plain Greek yogurt, turmeric. If you use this, make sure you mix it with black pepper. It activates the curcumin and the turmeric, so it works, and it's highly anti-inflammatory and so good for your blood sugar. Another one is cinnamon. Put it in your coffee in the morning, put it on your protein pancakes, put it on whatever you want. Cinnamon, there's actually a lot of studies that people are looking at using cinnamon instead of metformin to treat diabetes, so this is great. Garlic, apple cider vinegar, take a shot before bed, has been proven to reduce blood sugar. Eggs, make sure you include the yolk. Flax seeds, great thing to add into smoothies, or I see a lot of like flaxseed meal recipes for like cookies and stuff like that. Make sure they're ground up because your body's not able to obtain the nutrients from them in the whole seed form. Chia seeds, great fiber in those, as I'm sure you can tell because they gel up. And then the last are these miracle noodles, have also been found to reduce blood sugar due to the fiber that's in them. So if you've never seen these, I'm obsessed with them. They sell them at like Heinen's, Giant Eagle. Someone just told me they sell them at Costco even now. They're made out of something called shirataki. Do not recommend using them as a substitute for spaghetti, which I've had someone tell me he did before, and I was like, ew, that's gross. But they're really great in like soups. So like I make curry noodle soup with them, or like I make pad thai with them, or kind of like they're kind of like a chow mein noodle, like Asian dishes. They're super good though, and they're like 0 calories, great texture, so highly recommend those, and they're good for your blood sugar. So these are all things, you want to include them every day, once a week, whatever you can do. These are great things to include in your diet. And with the Greek yogurt, part of the reason why that's important is that, you know, it provides natural probiotics, and probiotics do play an important role in regulating your blood sugar and cravings and cortisol and all that stuff. You guys know I'm obsessed with gut health, so that's really important in all of this too. So, you know, you go to the doctor, he prescribes you with, or tells you you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, they're going to tell you to lose weight. Obviously not the most helpful advice, like thanks doc, whatever. Technically the recommendation is they want you to lose 5 to 7% of your weight, which obviously are these numbers listed below here if you're at any of those weights, just to give you a general idea. But rather than telling someone to lose weight, because that's a very hard thing to grasp and not like a realistic way to quantify it, I would say try these 2 things. So the first one is mindful eating, and I did a whole presentation about this a while ago, so if you are curious about mindful eating more, go back and watch that webinar, which will be posted on my website. But mindful eating is essentially just paying attention to your body's hunger cues. So many of us through life have gotten away from this because we eat when we have time, we eat because we have a routine, we eat because it's sitting there, we eat because we're stressed. Very rarely do we eat because we are physiologically hungry. And when we do, you know, sometimes it's because we waited too long to eat, we ignored our body's hunger cues, and then we're eating from a place of stress or such intense physiological hunger that we overeat or overindulge, which also is not mindful. So mindful eating is an important way to manage your calorie intake. And then the next, of course, can't forget about it, is movement. Da-da-da, one of my favorites. So exercise greatly impacts blood sugar. It basically gets that insulin to sweep that sugar into your cells and get it out of your bloodstream. So if you can go on a walk after eating dinner, this is going to greatly change that. So if you look at this chart over here on the right side, this is how your blood sugar changed with different types of exercise. With no exercise, the blood sugar remained at a 1. With moderate intensity exercise, it was at 0.5, 0.6 for weight training, 0.8 for high intensity exercise. So the goal is 150 minutes a week. And ideally combining resistance training and aerobic exercise. And the reason for this is because resistance training and aerobic exercise use 2 different muscles to draw from. So resistance training draws from the cells from your muscle cells. And remember, the excess blood sugar can go into the muscle cells or the fat cells. So each type of exercise draws from both of those. So we're using that excess sugar in both types of exercise, and that's why it's important to incorporate them both. So walk 15 to 30 minutes, walk 5 minutes, I don't care. Any of it will reduce the blood sugar that's kind of floating around in there. And obviously, if you are not normally physically active or you're new to this, you're diabetic, make sure you check your blood sugar before going out. If you are at 100 or below 100, you absolutely want to have like a 15-gram of carbohydrate snack, or bring something with you so that you don't have to worry about bottoming out. So here's like a tiny little workout you can incorporate for a little strength training. Adults start losing 5% of their muscle mass after the age of 30, okay? Each 10 years, you lose 5% of your muscle mass after the age of 30. So this means we all decrease in insulin sensitivity. We all aren't burning as many calories, and there's less places for our body to sweep that blood sugar. So we've got more sugar floating around in our blood and therefore more weight storage. So I know, I hear you. You don't have a gym, you don't like to lift weights, yada, yada, yada. Well, you can do this 5-minute kitchen workout with your family. Do it twice a day, do it 3 times a day, do it once a day, whatever. Get the whole crew involved. 10 squats, 10 calf raises. This is like nothing crazy, but it's just a little bit of something that you can incorporate into your routine that will help you build a little bit of muscle. And obviously it's customizable to you. So if you can't do, push-ups on the floor, not a lot of people can, do them on the wall, do them on the table, move to the chair, you can move as your strength increases. So this is totally customizable to you. So screenshot that, write it down. That can be your kitchen workout, because so often we're like in the kitchen, boiling water, standing there, we're waiting for something to cook in the oven. Well, you can be doing your little workout in the meantime. How perfect. And these are some, I thought these were good because I think we're the best at making excuses for ourselves 100%. It's so much easier to tell yourself why you don't want to do something than why you do. So here's some ways to make it work. If you think it's too hard, I think a lot of us build exercise or physical activity up to be this like really intense thing in our head, and it doesn't have to be. And I think that holds a lot of people back. So it doesn't have to be hard. It could be literally walk to the end of the street and back. That's all for today. That's all I got to do. Or, the results take too long. Well, it might feel that way. You might not see yourself losing weight right away, but think about what we just talked about with the blood sugar. So although you might not see yourself losing weight, your body's sweeping that sugar right out of your bloodstream into your cells where it belongs, rather than floating around and causing that cellular damage. So the results are instant. Not fun? Well, find an activity you enjoy. It doesn't have to be lifting weights or running. It could be riding your bike or dancing or jumping rope or roller skating, whatever floats your boat. It costs too much. Absolutely not. Find a free YouTube workout. Go for a walk, go swimming at the beach, whatever. It doesn't have to cost anything. So this is just, you can read over this, but this is just some ways that, to combat that inner voice in your head that doesn't want to believe that you're capable of it. So now we're going to talk about cortisol, also known as the stress hormone. And I think this is a huge, huge, huge player in so many people's troubles with weight loss and blood sugar in general. So I tried to simplify this as much as I could because it's kind of complicated. But basically, cortisol is released when you have that fight or flight response. So your body's stressed and it releases cortisol to combat that stress. And this is what happens. So if we're constantly stressed, basically your body releases cortisol and it leads to increased blood sugar levels. Then your body's not able to absorb that blood sugar because as cortisol, part of cortisol's job is to block the insulin from being effective. So you've got sugar floating around in your blood, insulin's being released. Remember, insulin is your fat storage hormone. Insulin's being released, but it's not able to do its job. It's not able to unlock the door to the cells and let that sugar float in. And then you've got your pancreas, poor little pancreas. It's like the little engine that could, and it's like chugging along, trying to pump out all this insulin, but it can't keep up because it's not working anyway. And this just keeps happening and happening, and your cells, who are supposed to be absorbing this sugar, cannot absorb their sugar because the insulin's not working. So they start sending signals to your brain saying, feed me, I don't have energy, I don't have enough blood sugar. And eventually all this extra sugar is wafted into the fat cells and stored as fat. So this is what happens with stress. So I think a lot of people don't realize that stress does affect blood sugar, and it's so important. And I wanted to put this in there because, you know, if this is something that you feel like might be happening to you, there's something called the ASI. It's a salivary test, and you can actually do like a mail-in test, and it tests your adrenal function. And adrenal function for so many people, like I said, I think is the reason why that they are not losing weight. There's a lot of things that play into adrenal function, like stress and chronic caffeine and sleep and lack of exercise that play into this. So I think a lot of people do have, would benefit from this test, even just to know that that's what's kind of counteracting what you want to happen. So stress management, I took this from an email I sent out a while ago. You guys have heard me talk about it. Meditation, I know it sounds so freaking weird, but just give it a shot. The worst that could happen is that everything that you wanted to happen works. And what I mean is you become less stressed, your body stops storing all that excess fat, your blood sugar normalizes. I mean, nothing to lose here, all to gain. So Insight Timer, Headspace, YouTube, these are all free applications that you can use to do guided meditations. Breathing exercises, I know we all get really, really mad and frustrated at times, and the best thing you can do is to just take a deep breath and breathe in and out. And think about, even if you don't want to, think about this cortisol. Be like, I'm shifting my cortisol out of my bloodstream, breathe in again and be like, I'm getting all that blood sugar out of my bloodstream and I'm not going to have all those cravings that my cortisol wants me to have. So that's a good reason to breathe. Yoga, and then the Shine app, which I love, is a good app that you can download on your phone. So what works for one person is different for another person. So what you want to do to manage your stress is up to you. It might be gardening. It might be going to the spa. I would love to do that one every day personally. Exercise, reading a book, listening to music. So yeah, another good way to reduce cortisol is exercise, as we kind of touched on earlier. And the last is sleep. So sleep does affect your cortisol, and it does affect your blood sugar level. So as you can see in the chart here, a person with 7 to 8 hours of sleep a day has a decreased risk for type 2 diabetes. And at the top here, I typed this out because I found this incredibly interesting. So in a non-diabetic, completely healthy person who is sleep deprived, so maybe getting that 4 to 5 to 6 hours of sleep range, because I hear this all the time. People say they do just fine in 4 to 5 to 6 hours of sleep. That's fine that you feel fine, but that doesn't mean that your cortisol isn't released and your body isn't in this panic mode, because it definitely is. So this is what happens. Your insulin decreases by 30%. So that's that thing that sweeps the sugar into the cells. Your glucose absorption rate decreases by 40%. So your body's not able to absorb that sugar. So what happens is that sugar is floating around in your bloodstream where it's not supposed to be. Decrease in thyroid stimulating hormone, increase in cortisol. The body can't properly use glucose. It triggers ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone, and it stimulates your appetite. So then it makes you want to eat. So all because you didn't get enough sleep, not only do you now have increased blood sugar, but you also have increased cravings, increased appetite, and increased fat storage. And this is in a normal, healthy person that's non-diabetic. So imagine what this does to someone who's diabetic. Okay, all these numbers are absolutely increased tenfold. And that's often why we find someone with high dosages of insulin that aren't being effective. So my recommendation here is sleep 6.5 to 7.5 to 8 hours a night. The more the better. Work your way up to it. And here's another part of this cycle for someone who is diabetic. Your body, your insulin sensitivity is decreased, your stress hormones are released, you have high blood glucose, which leads to increased urination, so you're up going to the bathroom, then you have worse sleep over again. So best thing you can do, get more sleep. And here are just some tips to improve your sleep. Nothing crazy. I think my best tip I can give you is to create a routine. I mean, during a normal work week, when I'm coming into the office, I go to bed at 8 o'clock. And I can tell you that it took me some time to build up to that. And I think the main thing that helped me build up to that was sleep deprivation in the first place, because I got up so early, but I wasn't going to bed early enough. And as a result, I was chronically tired. So having to work my way up to that start time that worked for me was the most important component. And it didn't happen overnight. It might be a half hour earlier today, a half hour earlier next week, and so forth, whatever works for you. Something else I might tell you is making sure you don't have large meals before bed, not because eating before bed is bad or whatever. That's totally a myth. The reason why you don't really want to eat before bed is that it takes your body's energy and focus away from sleep. So instead of sleeping, your body's digesting. So we don't want to be digesting at night. We want to be focusing on sleeping and restoring at night. And the last is hydration. So once again, lack of fluids are going to cause hyperglycemia. You guys know I talk about water all the time. So 8 cups of liquid per day. The best way to tell, easy, look at the color of your urine. I know it's gross, but if it's that dark yellow color, you need to get more water in your system. So this is the best way to judge it. Optimally clear, okay? If you don't like water, infuse it with fruit or citrus to make it taste a little better. Herbal teas that are unsweetened, or like those bubbles, or like the fizzy waters are really popular now. So there's a ton of options. I did not talk about artificial sweeteners in this presentation. That will be my next one, but do know I'm not a big fan of those. I don't think they're the best option, and I think you should just focus on either these unsweetened options or water. So here are key takeaways from all of that mumbo jumbo that I just said. 8 glasses of water daily. Follow the balanced plate method or your appropriate amount of carbohydrates, and I can help you calculate what might be ideal for you and help you manage that. Find ways to relieve stress, whatever works for you. Sleep 7 to 8 hours a night. Replace those refined carbohydrates with better options. And I'll talk more about this in our next presentation. I talk about bean pastas with people I work all the time, the right rice, the zero net carb bread, the cognac noodles. These are like hacks. They're like health hacks of a healthier version of something you might love, because I know it's hard to imagine life without pasta or rice or bread ever again. And if you like to snack, it's important that you find high fat or protein snacks. So examples would be like peanut butter, olive, nuts, hummus. These are good complex carbohydrates and proteins and fats that will prevent you from going on that blood sugar roller coaster. Because once again, the problem with those high carbohydrate meals is that increase in blood sugar, insulin response causes increased cravings and appetite. So even though you just ate, you're instantly craving more. So it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. And that's why maybe we should just, keep those to that 25% of the plate. So make sure you're including that high quality protein and fat in every meal. Eat real food. You shouldn't have to ask the question, is this real food? Real food is pretty freaking obvious. It's real chicken. It's real eggs. It's real broccoli. You shouldn't have to really read the box too much and look too hard at it. You should just know. There should be no question. Don't eat anything you hate, and eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. That's it. So I urge you, if you're someone who's working on your diabetes or prediabetes or is worried about this, or someone, take this checklist. Maybe work on one at a time. Print this out. And maybe just try and work on 8 glasses of water daily this month. And once you've got that under control, maybe you'll start working on sleep. It doesn't have to be everything at once, but I did want to lay these things all out for you and give you those tangible items. So at that point, it's up to you to take the road to disease or road to health, because this is 100% reversible. You can take charge of this, and I've seen it happen. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen people completely reverse their diabetes and improve their blood sugar and feel and look like a completely new person, and it's a really beautiful thing. So the food you can eat can be either the safest and most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison. This is my favorite quote, and it is so freaking true. So that is all. Does anyone, I'm going to turn on microphones. Does anyone have any questions? No. Right here. Questions? All right, guys. Well, that is all. So if anyone has any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we're good. Hi, Mary.
Hi.
Oh, thank you, Sherry. You're great. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining me. This was
Thanks for the
fun.
presentation.
Yeah, we'll talk more about, so I wanted to do this first one more about like the action steps. So we'll go more into the background. What's a carbohydrate? What is diabetes? That type of stuff in the next two presentations. Just because, yeah, I thought it might be a little more interesting for people to get this end of it first. So.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank
All
you.
right, guys. Well, yeah, logging off. Have a great day and have a great rest of your week. All right, bye.